Well,
All right, thank you. Well, hello, and welcome to Intercultural Spark, that show about how you too can spark change in the world through your mission-driven businesses and your life projects. I am your host, Deanna Schaas, and whether you are joining live or watching after the fact, thank you so much for that gift of taking the time to join us. I hope you're inspired by today's guest to realize how powerful you are and that you too can make change in the world. So today's guest is David Marienthal, my good friend and founder of Happy Medium Ventures. He's also the originator and producer of the documentary Mr. Kelly's Chicago. He is the son of one of Mr. Kelly's co-founders, and he's made it his mission now to collect the stories behind this legendary club that smashed color and gender lines and launched talents like Barbra Streisand, Richard Pryor, and more. So welcome to Intercultural Spark.
thank you very much, Deanna. It's so great to see you. What a great job you do, and I'm so happy to meet all your audience and your fans.
Oh, fantastic. So, well, thank you. And we're really excited to be here. You know what I thought made sense? Because I'd like to give context. I've seen the film and we know each other, so we've talked about it a lot. But what I'd like to do is open by showing the trailer just for context for people who don't know about Mr. Kelly. So is that okay? Let's go ahead and do that.
Sure.
At Mr. Kelly's nightclub in Chicago, I was a burgeoning superstar.
Mr. Kelly's was the real deal.
Mr. Kelly's was everything.
Kelly's was a hip, happening place.
That was the place to go.
If you were a regular, you were in the in crowd, because it was like the center of the world.
Saw this line that went around the block.
There was a hum, excitement.
And out came Richard Pryor.
Every time I go outside, the kids say, "Get him! He's all of them!"
Oscar, he brought in the people.
Had Wayne Cochran,
George Carlin.
Maya Angelou, Barbra Streisand, Ella Fitzgerald, Sarah Vaughan, Bette Midler, Barry Manilow.
Some of the biggest stars in the world on stage 18 feet away.
the artist was paramount. Everything connected.
To be a hit at Mr. Kelly's, that's what it's all about.
But then they were shooting and bullets, the National Guard, people firing guns.
They were singing "Smoke Gets in Your Eyes."
Race riots, mobsters, the mafia.
You always had those guys that looked really gruff.
Well, he broke things, he screamed, he yelled.
And there was so much tension.
Americans, you fight, you yell, you scream, you get it all out of your system.
That was an incredible time.
And we were just kids loving what we did.
Wow, that looks really exciting. So, so tell me, I do want to go. It sounds like that first voice. Oops, that first voice that we heard. Wait 1 second. Oh my gosh, my video is. Here we go. All right, that was scary for a minute. It started playing all the movies that came after, but we only want to focus on you and your film. So forget the other people. So, can you impress some of our peasants here about some of the people that you interviewed? So it sounded like Barbra Streisand's voice at the beginning, Bob Newhart. So did you just call them and be like, "Hi, it's me, David, let's talk"? Like, how did you even go about connecting with a lot of the celebrities that were in?
Well, this project has been going on for over 5 years, and literally the first interview started out with a family friend of my father's who they went to the bathhouses in New York City and discovered Bette Midler and brought her to Chicago. So I was able to get that on tape down at StoryCorps downtown. And after that, everything just started to fall into place. One of our first interviews was Bob Newhart, and I was able to get through to his lifetime manager, Jerry Digney, and I reached out to him, and he talked to Bob, and Bob said, fantastic. He was still 50 years later so grateful my father and uncle for, for encouraging, helping him really get his start. And this was before Bob Newhart had ever been on stage nationally, and he was checking out his act and trying out his act. And my father and uncle gave him a place to practice his art. And they were all, just young artists trying to, get on stage, trying to do what they could and willing to work for nothing. And it all started there. And so,
that's great. So it sounds like a lot of people just had that personal connection or that personal almost gratitude, I guess, for what your dad and your uncle had done for getting their career started.
Yeah, as Tim Reed said, I mean, the performers after 50 years of performing, they've seen all types of impresarios. And, as you can imagine, there's a lot of negative ones. But there was never anything bad said about my father and uncle, and they treated their, all the way from the performers to the busboys with respect and gratitude. And, it really, it shows, to your theme, how those type of energy can still be percolating so many decades later.
Well, and it makes me wonder, because when you started this project, I feel like, was it like, oh, I was a jerk as a teenager, I need to do right by my dad? Or how did you go from this personal story that really is your family to realizing that there's cultural history going on here?
Well, it really, kind of took on a life of its own. As I say, once I started reaching out to these performers and, Shecky Green, Lainey Kazan were some of our first ones. And they were just so willing to come forward and contribute and, really realize that, it was such an important time that they wanted to, help live on. It really, it became so much larger than my family story. And, but it certainly did start out as somewhat of a homage to my father and a memory, as you saw in the film. When I was a teenager in the 60s, our paths were not always intertwined with my father, who was born, in 1911. And came through depression. Our lives and our thoughts were a lot different in the 60s. And so it was a way of reconnecting with him at the start, and still is, but it just has become so much more than that.
Well, along those lines, so Laura Washington, who writes for the Sun-Times, she wrote a great piece and said, I never stepped foot inside Mr. Kelly's, but that she would have been allowed to. She talked about how it was a white-owned club, but it was really breaking color and gender barriers. Can you put that into a little bit of context in terms of what was going on in the time, but also what it meant for specific careers like, Sarah Vaughan or Ella Fitzgerald or others who performed there?
Yeah, I think, again, it's something that kind of, really opened my eyes. I mean, I was there and, living during the 60s and saw great performers like Richard Pryor, reinvent himself at Mr. Kelly's in terms of a political presence. Dick Gregory, who, again, was able to tell jokes about racial inequities, which, gets through to the psyche and educates in a much different way than reading a book or going to a lecture. So Mort Saul was really one of the first in the late 50s and 60s who really invented this political comedy that we all take for so much granted on the Daily Show, or at that point, intertwining comedy with politics was new. Before that, it was all just jokes about your mother-in-law or the food, or and so this was all new, and it was really invented with Mort Saul and Shelley Berman at Mr. Kelly's.
It's interesting. So Brianna asked, at what point did you really start to appreciate what your father and uncle created or the impact they had? I would even add one more layer of depth to that, because I think of you talking about being a teenager and, growing long hair and going out to protest. And yet here your dad and your uncle were actually doing that through the club as they were giving voice to these different performers.
Well, I know you have a teenager and have just recently been through that. And
I'm just waiting to hear the part where you go, I think every child should make a documentary about their parent at some point.
Right, but this was, again, on a personal level, pretty poignant, because my father was wearing suits and ties to the restaurants, and at some point seemed very conservative to me. As you say, with me going out and protesting and wearing jeans and smoking pot, and but he'd really been through it all, and it's certainly, I know Brianna asked, what point did I realize it? I mean, I'm realizing it every day. I mean, we had just had this great interview with Tim Reed on WGN radio last night, and Tim Reed just really, was so appreciative and so grateful for the opportunity that my father and uncle gave him at the clubs to really, birth his career.
Sure. And I think it was Tim Reed and Tom Dreesen. Tim is African-American, Tom is white. They performed together. Was that because I read their book, was that at Mr. Kelly's? And that was a big deal at the time, was it not?
Oh yeah, they again started their act at Mr. Kelly's. And Tom Dreesen was one of the early supporters that just really came out and did a great interview and helped me with the original trailer. But they again had an interracial comedy duo when, at that point, a black and white person couldn't necessarily walk down the street, especially in Chicago. And this is something that Tim Reed talked about again last night. And, putting things in context, a club where black and white people could sit down and laugh together and enjoy a great meal was not customary in Chicago. And to have, people of all colors on the stage, this was, with Daley and the Martin Luther King riots, and Chicago, as it still is, not necessarily a friendly place.
And so we're talking about the 50s, 60s, and 70s when this was happening. So, I do want to look at, so a lot of people that I connect with are people, it's the whole idea of how, as this individual, you can make change in the world. Like, you just have to act, but that each person, we have the power to make change. And so, dreams are great, but without action behind them, they just stay in your head. So how did you get the idea to do the documentary? And then how did you go about putting a team together? Because you now have a pretty, I wouldn't say good size team, but you've got a director, you're the producer, but you've got editors. So you've got this team. How did you see that happen incrementally to turn it from just an idea into the piece that it is now, which, by the way, the piece now that is going to be American premiere at the Gene Siskel Film Center, actually coming up just over a week from now.
I think, it's just putting one foot in front of the other. I had this, I thought about this idea of commemorating their work for many years in a coffee table book or photo book, and it really started out, with small ideas of doing, 20, 30-minute video that I could make for the family. And as I say, with the encouragement and support of so many people, the performers, my partner, Lori Glenn, you, Deanna, and Gino. I mean, all these people that just said, well, this is a great idea. This story needs to be told. I was able to, keep finding good people. Obviously, I cycled through some people that weren't a good fit. But then with our director now, Teddy Bogosian, who is a a teacher at Brown University in film and has done a lot of work with PBS. Scott Dumler, our editor, who does work with Chaz Ebert and Rick Bayless here in Chicago. Our researcher, Adam Karsten, and all the people at Loyola University that have helped us. It was really with their energy and their interest in saying this is the real deal. We worked with Loyola University in the early stages when they adopted the project as part of their graduate program in public history. So I had 20 graduate students going out and doing interviews with neighbors, other musicians, patrons, to really get a feel for the time. And now Newberry Library has we donated our whole archive of over 30 record albums, thousands of photos, all the hundreds of interviews, ephemera, menus, ashtrays to Newberry Library. And they are curating the whole collection as the Mr. Kelly's Archive and are going to do a major exhibit in 2 years.
Oh, that's fantastic. You know what I find so fascinating about this? It's the idea of don't you be the one to say no. Like don't you be the one to say, oh, that couldn't happen. And I think of just the way that you just ask and see what happens. Some people work, some don't. One example of that is when you had mentioned just people who help. And this was my husband, Gino, and I, who's from Brazil, joined you and Lori at City Winery when Sergio Mendes was performing. He had performed, I guess, at your dad's club. And you're like, I wish I could meet him. And of course, my husband's also Brazilian. And so he literally went up and convinced someone to let us go upstairs. It was literally, that was the connection of just let's see, as long as he's here, if we can get in the VIP line. And we did. And you were able to connect with him. But I wonder if there's more stories of things, opportunities like that where you're like, let me just see what happens. Was there one like that kind of, you were like, should I do it? And then you surprised it?
Well, thinking back, Ramsey Lewis, who really came up at London House, which is my father's other jazz club. He passed by there as a kid going to his classical music lessons and ended up being the house band and then going on to really international stardom.
Wait, he ended up being the house band at Mr. Kelly's?
He was the house band at London House, which was
at London House, okay.
Which was the jazz club that my father owned that was really all about the greatest jazz musicians. So he was the house band, and then he went on to creating his own international presence, but he would come back every Christmas and every prom season to the London House. And so he had great stories, and he was a very good family friend, but he wasn't, I hadn't been close to him for decades. And so, and he's a big deal. And so I really had to kind of elbow my way into his dressing room through his PR person. And, and that was literally 4 or 5 years ago. And at this point, he's a huge part of the film. His story is a big part of the film. And we have several great interviews with him. And he's a great friend. I call him, once a month. And he's getting ready to do an interview on Sirius Jazz FM about his time at London House.
Oh, fantastic!
It was as you say, it was very similar to when we went in to see Sergio Mendes, and he
really
we established a connection, and it went on from there.
That's fantastic. So Brianna says the cool thing about being a documentary is that now you have all these great interviews and pictures. So you've talked about you're doing the exhibit at the library. Might you still do a book? Is there another? I'm just wondering if there's, with all the research you've done, if there's actually another project or another movie in this.
Well, again,
or do I need to let you air the first one first?
No, in terms of the grand vision, I'd always see this as a multimedia platform where we do have plans for a book. We're working with Lou Ehrenberg, who is a professor emeritus of Loyola, and he's talking about doing much more of a cultural study of the times.
Great.
I do have a script and an idea for a narrative TV series, Mr. Kelly's in Rush Street in the 50s and 60s of the time of the mobsters and the crooked politicos and the great entertainers, and a much more dramatic type of rendition of it. We have a whole collection of these albums that I'd love to see come out as a CD of the greatest hits of Mr. Kelly's in London House. So yeah, I mean, at this point, it was going to get the documentary out, and it's coming out, as you say, at Siskel Center the 17th through the 20th, and then it's coming on video on demand to the nation on iTunes.
Oh, when is that?
Amazon,
Great.
October 12th.
Okay, and what was on WTTW? There was an airing. Was that the final film, or what was that?
No, we had a shortened version,
okay,
preview version on WTTW in May, and people really got a great reception. We got double the average ratings, and people really loved it. So, it was a time to really give back to Chicago, because Chicago, I definitely appreciate Chicago and all the people of Chicago that, came out back in the day that I'm still benefiting from, and my family certainly benefited from as well.
Sure. I'm wondering, of all those stories, so the connection to Chicago, because I was at that event, it was like there were 10 minutes in Chicago where we thought COVID was done, everything opened, and that was actually when this film debuted. So we were actually able to get together in person before kind of things went back. And listening to those interviews, it is so fascinating to hear people that you only see as a star capacity talking about Chicago at that time and what it meant to them. So you've heard so many stories as you were doing this. Can you share one? I'm sure there were many. Is there one story that you were listening to that you were like, wow, I never saw it that way, or I never knew that?
Well, I think Dick Gregory was very, very touching and educational, and somewhat hard to hear about Chicago back in the day. I guess it's not necessarily the good part of it, but he talked about how Kelly's was one of the very few places where he felt comfortable performing, and it was the start of opening up. But he also talked about walking out of Mr. Kelly's onto Rush Street, onto the north side, and feeling like he needed, very uncomfortable on the streets. And the segregation that existed then. So that was kind of a difficult story. On the other hand, certain performers, including Tim Reed or Tom Dreesen, definitely talked about how Chicago was such a great, or Bob Newhart was such a great place to to birth your act, to create your act, because the audience in downtown Chicago was both sophisticated, but they were also, not as jaded as New York or LA.
Well, and back then too, people would really get dressed up to go out to someplace like a London House or a Mr. Kelly's. It was a night on the town. It feels like people are a little bit more. Yeah, go ahead.
It was really an amazing, there was not only the performers and the patrons, but there was celebrities from around the world. Bonnie Colic, who was a really well-known Chicago folk pop singer. She tells about when John and Yoko were sitting in the audience.
Really?
And,
wow.
And then Tony Bennett and Errol Garner in the audience.
So not
Mickey
even
Mantle.
just that's amazing. So it really attracted the top, like everybody wanted to be there.
Yeah, Bob Hope, David Gardner. All these, and Chicago, again, it is, it's a great city, but, it was truly it was a nexus of entertainment and business and culture then. When people had to stop, all the way back when people had to stop on the train between New York and LA and Chicago, and that's when Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday and Sarah Vaughan all played in the late 50s and early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
So Chicago is really a nexus of entertainment and culture.
Mm-hmm. That is fascinating. And again, just that whole environment that your dad and your uncle built around that. I want to turn back to the process, because what I always feel is that people are more powerful than they ever imagine, and that people can take their ideas and make them happen. When a new idea or a new project starts, it's pretty common that people hear no. And, Brianna's asking a good point about taking a chance and seeing and jumping on opportunities. Did you hear a lot of no's? Like, was there any point where you're like, maybe I'm not going to end up doing this?
I was formerly an architect and a teacher, so this was not my first career. So I heard a lot of no's, but what's more difficult was and maybe anybody in sales, I guess, or anything could identify with this, is the radio silence. So sending out dozens of emails and getting one at some point, no was a good response, because at least
they responded.
Right. And,
that is the most optimistic thing that I've heard about trying to make your dreams come true. That's funny.
Right. So I know Herbie Hancock, we finally got after years. He's a Chicagoan. He's a wonderful person. He comes to Chicago. He was at Symphony Center. I knew people. I had an entree to him, and I just, it just could not get through. And finally, his PR person and his family, had the time for an interview, and it turned out to be the highlight of the film, how he really, invented his musical style, and his musical style really changed the London House. And he's just such a wonderful, insightful man that it was just eye-opening to meet him.
Fantastic. And it was just that perseverance and that persistence. So between London House, I want to move on, because I know you have more that you want to do. So between London House, Mr. Kelly's, and Happy Medium, which I understand was a dance club, and I'm a fan. By the way, I have some very interesting connections to all this. One is, did you know, right after college, I did Bette Midler impersonations at parties. So if that's ever helpful in any way for your documentary, just let me know.
We're ready to. Well, we are doing a live show at City Winery on September 18th on Saturday night, where we recreate all the stars, including Bette Midler, with live Chicago entertainment. And we've done 4 of these shows, and they've all been full houses, and people really love them, with Daryl Nitz and Denise Tomasella. And it's going to be a wonderful evening.
That's fine. Now I'm blushing, waiting for you to call and be like, about that Bette Midler thing. I only know the Sophie Tucker jokes. I don't sing. That was was my demise. I don't sing. I do Sophie Tucker jokes. And I love disco. So what's next? So it feels like you've got to work through all the things that you're doing with this film, but are there other, you have so much original content now. Do you think you'll focus on some of the others, or see through? You said TV show, you've got this coming out, the exhibit. Is there another documentary maybe coming in the works?
Well, we certainly have another material for Mr. Kelly's 2. I've also thought about, in terms of documentaries, doing a documentary about all the great clubs that were on the south side of Chicago. Were really happening at the same time, and a lot of the same people. So it's really, getting through. We have the premiere next weekend at Siskel, the City Winery show, and then we are premiering it in California.
Fantastic.
The Monica Film Festival on September 24th. And, I'll be out there. And so we'll see if Lily Tomlin or Barbra Streisand shows up at the opening. And, looking forward to, really seeing what, from all the feedback we're getting, this is a great national story. We know the people of Chicago love it. So.
But it sounds like really, just so many national connections, just with what was happening culturally at the time. Well, David, we have gotten to the point of the show where we are ready for our flash exercise. So our flash exercise is I love to add an element of fitness, health and fitness. We've been sitting for 30 minutes. So our flash exercise is an exercise that, if you interpret it, relates to the theme of our show. So I am going to invite our viewers, if you're able to do it as well, I'm going to make myself large for just a second to show the exercise. And then I hope you'll join us. And then I'll give you a chance to guess if you know why this is good for the show. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So our exercise today is one that you can do right at your desk. It's actually a push-up. So basically you're going to stand. I'm going to get rid of my chair here. You just need to stand with your legs probably about 3 or 4 feet away from your desk and put your hands right on the edge of your desk. And it's a push-up. So straight line from head to heel. You come forward. I'm going to say turn your head to the right and then lift. Forward, turn left. So basically it's a push-up. You go side and lift and side and lift. So actually I want to catch David here joining this as well, because you look great doing this. All right, show us again. Look at those biceps bulging. Perfect. I love it. All right. So excellent. So if you're able to do that home, perfect form, by the way. That is an exercise for your pectorals and also your shoulders as you press. So now the question is, do you know why that is a perfect exercise for talking about an amazing documentary film with the documentary filmmaker? Any idea?
Are you asking me?
I am. I'm giving you a chance to guess.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think just what you were talking about in terms of kind of making the push or making the lift and continuing to push through things and seeing where things would turn out.
That is perfect. That's a really good, you're really good at interpretive aerobics. That is a great interpretation of that final push. I was also thinking as a filmmaker, because we're going in and out, it's kind of like, okay, I'm ready for my close-up, like as the stars. Ready for my close-up. Go ahead, film it. So that's what I was thinking too, but I like the combination of those. So. Well,
I'm just happy you didn't have me start to disco dance, because that was gonna be a stretch.
Oh my God. Now the problem is, you know why I didn't? Because if I started, I'd start dancing and actually forget that you were here. So that, and actually speaking of being here, I'm so delighted, David Marienthal. Thank you so much for joining me. Congratulations. So you can learn more at mrkellyschicago.com, the website. There's shows coming up, exhibits, so much more to come. Thank you for taking your personal history and turning it into this amazing collective history for Chicago. And it sounds like now the country and ultimately the world. So thank you again for joining us. And we can't wait to hear what else happens. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Deanna. This has been so much fun.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.